The funeral had been over for exactly 4 days when my son started talking about the square footage of my house like I wasn't standing 3 feet away in the kitchen. I was still holding the mug my husband had used every morning for 41 years, and Jason was showing his wife something on his phone while she wrote numbers in a little notebook. "If we list in the spring," he said, "the market here is strong." My husband had been buried for 96 hours, and my son was already calculating the value of the house we built together. That was the moment I learned something about grief nobody prepares you for. Sometimes the hardest part isn't losing the person you loved. Sometimes it's realizing the people around you were quietly waiting for their turn. My name is Linda Kowalski, and I was 66 years old the morning I realized my own son was making plans for my life without asking me. I was standing in my kitchen in Naperville, Illinois, holding a mug of coffee that had gone cold while Jason and his wife Ashley talked about resale value like they were touring a property instead of visiting their mother. Ashley walked slowly through the living room with a small notebook in her hand, her heels tapping against the hardwood floors my husband David had refinished himself 12 years earlier. Jason finally noticed I was watching them and cleared his throat like he just remembered I was part of the conversation. "Mom, we've talked about this before," he said. "The house is a lot for one person. It would be easier if you simplified things." Simplified was the word he kept using. It sounded helpful when he said it, like he was offering a solution instead of taking control. I set my mug down carefully on the counter because my hands had started to shake and I didn't want them to see it. David and I bought that house 38 years earlier when Jason was 3, and the maple tree in the front yard barely reached the mailbox. I raised my son in those rooms. I packed school lunches in that kitchen. I stood at the same stove cooking thousands of dinners while David came home smelling like sawdust and cold air from construction sites. And my husband had been gone for less than a week. I said Jason's name once, quietly, the way mothers do when they want their child to remember who they're talking to. He nodded, but didn't meet my eyes. "Dad handled most of the house stuff," he said. "It's different now. You'd be happier somewhere smaller." Ashley stepped into the hallway and looked toward the staircase. "I was just thinking a few small updates could help if Linda ever decided to sell," she said, her voice soft and polite the way people sound when they believe they're being reasonable. I didn't argue, not that evening. I let them finish their coffee, I walked them to the door, and stood on the front porch long after their car disappeared down the street while the cold November air settled into the quiet neighborhood. The maple tree David and I planted 23 years earlier stretched over the roofline now, taller than we ever imagined. David used to joke we'd never live long enough to see it reach the second floor. I went back inside, washed the mugs, turned off the lights, and went to bed in a room that suddenly felt too big for one person. Over the next few days, Jason called more often than he had in years. At first, it sounded like concern. Then the questions started getting specific. Had I talked to the bank yet? Did I know where the insurance papers were? Had I considered meeting a financial advisor about simplifying my accounts? Every conversation circled back to the same word, simplifying. What Jason didn't realize was that grief has a strange side effect. When the world goes quiet, you start noticing things you ignored before. And one morning, about 10 days after the funeral, I opened our old joint bank account and saw the first sign that my son had already started simplifying my life in ways he hadn't mentioned. If you want to see what happened next, stay with me. And if you like stories that reveal what people try to hide, don't forget to like and subscribe. The first weeks after losing someone move in strange, slow circles. You wake up early because the house is too quiet. You make coffee for 2 people before remembering there's only one of you now. And you walk through familiar rooms, touching objects like they might explain what happened. David's coat still hung by the back door. His reading glasses were on the table beside the couch where he always left them. 41 years of marriage leave small footprints everywhere. Jason kept calling during those weeks. At first, I thought he was worried about me living alone, but the conversation slowly turned into something else. He asked questions that sounded casual but kept returning to the same subjects: the house, the accounts, the idea of making things easier. One morning, about 10 days after the funeral, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and opened the joint account David and I had used for years. Jason's name had been added after David's heart scare 5 years earlier, so he could help if something ever happened to us. At the time, it had felt practical. Families trust each other with things like that. The account history loaded slowly while the coffee maker hummed behind me. Then I saw the transfer. $3,000 had been moved 4 days earlier into another account. The location listed on the authorization showed Denver, where Jason lived. At first, I assumed it was a mistake or a payment David had scheduled before he passed. But when I checked the details more carefully, I saw two things that made my stomach tighten. The transfer had happened the same afternoon Jason and Ashley visited after the funeral, and the alert emails for the account had been redirected months earlier to Jason's address. I sat there staring at the screen while the coffee beside me cooled. Raising a child means spending decades believing you understand the person they've become. You remember the boy who needed help tying his shoes, and the teenager who forgot to take the trash out, and you assume the adult version of that person is built from the same pieces. Seeing that transfer forced me to consider a possibility I had never wanted to imagine. I closed the laptop and picked up the phone and called someone who had spent enough time around our family to tell me the truth. My nephew Ethan answered on the second ring. His father, David's younger brother, died when Ethan was 12, and after that he spent so much time at our house, David used to joke we had accidentally raised 2 boys instead of 1. I told Ethan what I had found. There was a long pause on the line before he spoke. "Linda," he said calmly, "how long do you want to wait before you do something about this?" I looked back at the laptop screen and thought about the way Jason kept using that word, simplify. "Long enough," I said slowly, "to see how much he thinks he can take." If you want to see what happened next, stay with me. And if you like stories that reveal what people try to hide, don't forget to like and subscribe. Once you notice something like that, the entire house starts feeling different. The kitchen smelled the same. The clock still ticked over the sink, but every normal moment felt like it belonged to another version of my life. I didn't confront Jason right away. Ethan had given me one piece of advice before we hung up the phone that morning. "Don't rush," he said. "People who believe they're getting away with something will eventually show you exactly who they are." So I waited. I checked the account every few days without saying a word to anyone. The second transfer appeared a week later, $2,000 this time, same destination account in Denver. By the time Christmas passed, the total had quietly grown past $20,000, small enough that Jason probably believed I wouldn't notice, large enough that I started writing every transaction in a notebook I kept in the kitchen drawer. Meanwhile, Jason and Ashley kept visiting the house with the same polite concern they'd shown since the funeral. Ashley brought casseroles and asked if I was sleeping well. Jason talked about retirement communities near Naperville where people my age could live comfortably without worrying about maintenance. One Thursday afternoon, Ashley stood in the hallway studying the upstairs bathroom and said something that made the entire situation suddenly clear. If Linda ever decides to sell, this place would photograph beautifully in the spring. She said it the way people talk about something that has already been decided. Later that evening, I stepped outside to the back porch to bring in a package and heard Ashley on the phone near the driveway. She didn't realize I was standing inside the kitchen door. "Once the house lists, the timeline handles itself," she said quietly. There was no anger in her voice, just confidence. That was the moment I understood they weren't just taking money. They were planning the next step of the story where my life became something they managed. Ethan came by the following weekend under the excuse of helping me organize David's tools in the garage. While we sorted old drill bits and boxes of screws, he asked if I had spoken to a lawyer yet. I told him not yet. I wanted to wait a little longer, because by then I had started noticing something else. Jason had no idea his father had prepared for this possibility years before any of us realized it might be necessary. If you want to see what happened next, stay with me. And if you like stories that reveal what people try to hide, don't forget to like and subscribe. The morning after I heard Ashley talking about the timeline, I called our lawyer. Barbara Finch had handled legal work for David and me for nearly 20 years. She wasn't warm or comforting, but she was careful and exact, and when your life begins shifting under your feet, that kind of precision becomes very reassuring. I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook open and explained everything. The transfers, the conversations about selling the house, the quiet pressure to simplify my life. Barbara listened without interrupting. When I finished, she asked one question that stopped me cold. "Linda," she said, "did David ever explain the property he transferred into your name in 2019? I told her he had mentioned something once about a small cabin near Lake Michigan, but I thought he was just talking about a future vacation place." Barbara cleared her throat softly. "It wasn't a vacation plan," she said. "Your husband purchased the property outright and registered it completely in your name as part of his estate plan. According to the documents he signed, it became yours the moment he passed. The cabin sat on 3 wooded acres outside a small town in Door County, Wisconsin. Jason's name appeared nowhere in the paperwork." I sat at the table for a long time after that call ended, because suddenly the quiet confidence David always carried made sense in a new way. He hadn't been ignoring the small changes he saw in our son over the years. He had simply made sure I would never be trapped by them. That same week, a locksmith replaced every lock on the house while Jason and Ashley were out of town. Barbara helped me remove Jason from the bank account and transfer the remaining funds into one only I controlled. Ethan helped me pack the things that mattered most: David's photographs, my books, the cedar box where we kept the letters we wrote each other before email made letters unnecessary. Over 3 quiet weekends, we drove my life 4 hours north to the cabin in Door County, Wisconsin, while Jason believed I was still considering his retirement community idea. The first time I unlocked the cabin door, I found a small envelope tucked beside the kitchen window frame. David's handwriting was on the front. I sat on the porch after reading it while Lake Michigan turned gray in the winter light, and something inside my chest finally loosened for the first time since the funeral. 3 weeks later, Jason called to say he had spoken with a real estate agent, and April would be the perfect time to list the house. I let him finish before answering calmly. "April might work," I said. "The spring market is strong here." There was a pause. "Here?" Jason asked. I took a sip of coffee and told him the truth he hadn't expected. "I'm not in that house anymore. I moved out weeks ago. I'm at the cabin your father left me, the one you never knew about." Silence filled the line before he finally spoke. "Mom," he said quietly. "Your father knew you better than you think," I replied, "and he still loved you anyway. What you do with that is up to you." I hung up the phone and stepped out onto the porch, where the lake shimmered through the birch trees, and for the first time in months, the morning felt quiet in the right way.